Welcome back to my channel, where real story takes its time. Let's get into it.
Hi everyone, my name is Logan. I never imagined I'd end up in a situation where I was actively plotting revenge against my own family, but here we are. A little backstory. I'm 28, single, and run a small but successful tech company I started from scratch 5 years ago. Growing up, my family always treated money and status as some kind of divine right, but only for them. My parents and my uncle, mainly my mom, Sandra, and Uncle Marvin, have always had this idea that everyone owes them everything. Me, apparently, included. Things got tense a few months ago. I'd just landed a major deal that finally put me on solid ground financially. My parents had a knack for calling me successful in public, but behind closed doors, it was different. I came to realize that my mom and uncle had been talking about me behind my back in a family group chat on some messaging app one didn't even use. I only found out because my younger cousin, Ezra, left his tablet at my apartment during a visit. I picked it up to grab a charger and, well, the notifications were open. I tried to rationalize it at first. Maybe it was harmless venting, but it wasn't. It was brutal. He thinks he's better than us just because he's successful. Uncle Marvin scoffed in one message. He owes us everything. My mom replied immediately after, and then a series of emojis I can't even describe, like some smug little parade of triumph. I sat there frozen, staring at the screen. I'd spent years working my ass off while my family mocked every attempt I made to get ahead. Every small business idea they laughed at, every job I took while saving, every moment they treated me like a charity project instead of a son. And now here they were, acting like I owed them a lifetime of payments just because I'd finally made it. For a week, I stayed quiet. I didn't confront them. I didn't post anything online. I just watched. And in that week, they made their demands. They started with little things. Oh, can you help cover our credit card? We need a loan for the car repairs. Logan, you know how it is. They didn't ask. They told. And every single time, I paid it. I did it because despite everything, I wanted to believe they weren't completely irredeemable. But then it got worse. I started noticing that their bank transfers were failing more often, that the payments I'd made were somehow mysteriously undone, that the cards I paid off were being declined. At first, I assumed it was bad luck or a glitch. But the day the emails started piling in, I realized it was deliberate. Every single transaction had been blocked, reversed, or canceled. By the time their calls started, it was like a storm. I woke up one morning to 53 missed calls, 9 voicemails, and a single text from my mom. Why are you doing this to us? I read it, exhaled, and sat back. I didn't reply immediately. Not yet. I wanted them to feel the tension, the panic. I wanted them to realize, finally, that the golden child they assumed they had influence over had his own power. I knew if I replied rashly, it would ruin the effect. So I waited. I watched their messages pile up, the desperation growing in every subsequent text, the guilt tripping, the attempts to manipulate. I watched as Uncle Marvin's voice got louder in calls I ignored, demanding explanations, acting like I was the villain. It was surreal to watch them scramble, to see the same people who had mocked me for years now entirely powerless, forced to confront the consequences of their greed and entitlement. And then, the turning point came. I got a notification that Uncle Marvin had arrived at my building. I could see him from the security cameras pacing in the lobby, phone glued to his ear, muttering about, "This is ridiculous, and he can't do this to us." My mom wasn't with him, but I knew she'd called for backup. They didn't know I was fully aware of everything, but soon, they would. I watched Uncle Marvin pace in the lobby for a long time, pretending to himself that he was in control. He muttered into the phone so loudly I could hear snippets through the security feed. This is absurd. I can't believe he'd actually. And then, Sandra, he's not answering. I don't know what to do. Maybe the lawyer can. I sat in my apartment above him, my hands folded, feeling a strange mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. I had never imagined I would be in a position where my parents' greed and sense of entitlement were not only visible, but completely powerless against me. Years of feeling belittled, dismissed, and taken advantage of were finally balancing themselves out. and it felt almost surreal to watch. I remembered every little thing now, every moment they had ever made me feel like I owed them something. I had spent Christmas mornings opening gifts that were conditional. We only got this for you because we expect you to, be successful one day. Birthday celebrations were always reminders of debts or failures, never joy. And yet, I had stayed quiet, kept my head down, and worked. I had built something real while they were busy pretending the world owed them a favor just for showing up. The sound of his pacing echoed faintly through the vents, and I could see him gesturing wildly, clearly trying to explain himself to whoever was on the other end. But no one could save them now. Not from the financial chaos they had created themselves, and certainly not from the consequences of underestimating me. After a while, he slumped into a chair, muttering curses under his breath, not loud enough for me to catch, but enough for me to sense the desperation. The calls and texts had stopped coming in bursts. Instead, they had become a constant stream, piling into my inbox like evidence of their panic. My mom's messages were the worst. They weren't just questions or demands anymore. They were increasingly erratic, alternating between pleading and thinly veiled threats. "You're making a huge mistake, Logan," one text read. "You'll regret this." I had to chuckle. Regret was the last thing I felt. If anything, this was the first moment I'd ever felt the weight shift in my favor. For years, I had been careful, cautious, trying not to anger them, to avoid conflict. And for years, it had all been in vain. Now, I could see the consequences of their arrogance and entitlement, and it was beautiful in its own quiet way. I went to the window and watched Uncle Marvin. He was now standing up again, phone pressed to his ear, and pacing like a man on the verge of losing his mind. He didn't notice the building security cameras had an angle that caught the entire lobby, or that the security systems app on my phone gave me a clear live view. My hands hovered over my keyboard as I considered my next move. Part of me wanted to call him down, to confront him directly, to hear the excuses spill out in real time. But another part knew that letting them stew, letting them feel powerless, was far more satisfying. They had spent so many years controlling and manipulating me that I could almost taste the irony. And then it hit me. My parents weren't the only ones involved. Ezra, my cousin, had always been a tool for them. He had this smug little habit of pretending to be clever, pretending to be supportive of me, while secretly reporting everything back to my mom and Uncle Marvin. I remembered the way he had laughed when I tried to talk about my ideas for a side business 5 years ago. He had a way of smiling that made you feel like you were insane for believing in yourself, all while scribbling notes to my parents about every misstep. I checked my inbox again. My mom had sent another text, this one longer, desperate, and almost incoherent. "Logan, I don't know why you are doing this. We gave you everything, everything. You have to help us. This is not who you are. Please, please don't make this worse." Everything. I almost laughed out loud. Everything they gave me had come with strings attached, guilt trips, and a constant reminder that I was never enough. And now, the same people who had belittled me for years were reduced to pleading through a screen. Then I heard the elevator ding. My stomach tightened. Uncle Marvin had apparently convinced my mom, or maybe Ezra, to come along. The thought of all three of them in the lobby, probably talking about strategies to manipulate or guilt me, made my pulse quicken. I hadn't seen them in months, except for the occasional tense phone call. But seeing them together, vulnerable, desperate, and completely at my mercy, it was going to be unlike anything I had ever experienced. I walked over to the main security monitor, zooming in. The elevator doors opened slowly, and I saw her first, my mom, Sandra, with her usual smug yet desperate smile. She was wearing one of those outfits she always picked to make a statement. Look at me. I'm sophisticated and classy. But the way she moved, the way her eyes darted, betrayed her panic. Behind her was Ezra, looking unsure but trying to mimic confidence. And last, Uncle Marvin, muttering to himself, scanning the lobby like a man who had lost the plot entirely. I leaned against the counter and sipped my coffee, my mind racing through the possibilities. How should I play this? Confront them immediately? Let them stew in their panic a bit longer? Each option had its own satisfaction. Each option had consequences. But I knew one thing for certain. The way they treated me for my entire life had led to this. And I wasn't going to let it slip away. I picked up my phone and opened the chat again, just to check. My mom had sent 3 more messages in the last 5 minutes. Ezra had texted once from Marvin's phone, probably hoping I wouldn't notice, and Marvin himself hadn't sent a message, likely relying on calls. And then it happened. A small, seemingly innocuous text, but the tone was different. I could feel it immediately. "Logan, we need to talk. Now. Please. We can fix this before it gets worse." I set the phone down slowly, looking at the live feed of them in the lobby. My pulse quickened. They had no idea that I already knew everything. That every single word they had typed in their private chat, every whispered complaint, every demand disguised as concern, it was all laid bare to me. And they were walking straight into the trap. I could hear Ezra whispering to my mom, "Maybe he'll just give us the money back if we apologize?" My mom shook her head violently, whispering, "No, not yet. Not until we figure this out." Uncle Marvin paced behind them, muttering, he can't actually." I took a deep breath, feeling the calm before the storm. Years of planning, years of being underestimated, and now, this moment, it was finally here. And the best part? They had no idea what was coming. I pressed a button on my monitor, unlocking the main entrance. The doors clicked open, and the 3 of them stepped in, their eyes scanning, searching for the familiar sense of control they always assumed they had over me. But this time, there was none. I walked out of my apartment, deliberately slow, giving them time to register my presence. Marvin's eyes widened. My mom's hand shot to her mouth. Ezra's expression froze somewhere between fear and confusion. And then I said the first words. "Hi," I said, smiling just slightly. "We need to talk about what's been happening." They froze, like deer caught in headlights. I could see the panic starting to bubble. Every instinct they had for control and manipulation was kicking in, but it was useless. They all just stared at me for a moment, and the silence was deafening. Marvin's mouth opened, then closed again, like he couldn't figure out whether to yell, plead, or storm out. My mom's eyes darted between me and Marvin, her lips pressed tightly together, betraying both panic and disbelief. Ezra, the youngest in the room but always the most confident, or at least he pretended to be, looked like he'd suddenly realized he might have miscalculated every move he'd ever made. I kept my hands in my pockets, letting the pause stretch, letting them feel the weight of the moment. Years of manipulation, belittlement, and passive-aggressive advice had built up inside me, and now, for the first time, I was the one in control. Finally, Marvin muttered, "Logan, we didn't know you were. I mean," he trailed off, clearly struggling to find words that wouldn't make him look weak. "You didn't know I was listening," I said calmly, my voice low, measured. "Or maybe you didn't think I would ever notice. Either way, we have a problem." My mom stepped forward, hands raised slightly, trying to take charge, the way she always did in these situations. "Logan, honey, we can fix this. You know we've always loved you. We just what?" I interrupted. "Expected me to pay for your mistakes? Expected me to sacrifice my hard work, my stability, my life, just because you decided to spend recklessly and act like the world owes you favors?" Her face tightened. She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again, probably realizing no excuse would justify what they had written and planned behind my back. Ezra, still trying to recover some semblance of composure, said, "Mom, maybe we can. He'll understand if we just explain." I shook my head. "No, Ezra, you don't get to explain anything. You've spent your entire life contributing to the narrative that I owe you. And for the first time, that's not true." Their panic was palpable now. Marvin's face had gone red, his usual smug arrogance completely gone. My mom's hands fidgeted with the strap of her purse, which she probably forgot she had slung over her shoulder. Ezra's jaw was tight, like he was trying not to cry or throw a tantrum. It was hard to tell which. I let the silence stretch even further. I wanted them to feel the weight of it. I wanted them to recognize, in that precise moment, that they were powerless. They had spent years controlling me, or at least trying to, and now the situation had flipped entirely. Finally, Marvin muttered, We can make this right. We'll pay back whatever you did. Please. I raised an eyebrow, letting the words hang in the air. Pay back? Marvin, I didn't steal anything. I didn't lie. I didn't cheat. Every payment I made on your behalf, every card I covered, every transfer I helped with, that was out of my own goodwill. But now, thanks to a few adjustments, a few precautions, those transactions no longer exist for you. They all froze. The color drained from their faces. Ezra's hand flew to his mouth, muttering, "Wait, what do you mean?" I said slowly, taking deliberate steps closer, that the funds you've been counting on, your credit cards, the bank transfers, the automatic payments you relied on, they've all been reversed. Every single one. And none of it is recoverable without my approval. My mom took a step back, gripping the strap of her purse like it was a lifeline. Logan, this isn't, you can't, you don't. Don't what? I asked, cutting her off. Don't take responsibility? Don't face the consequences of your actions? Don't recognize that for years you treated me like a charity case while you sat back and planned behind my back? The room was suffocating now. You could almost hear the panic buzzing, low and dangerous. Every muscle in Marvin's body was tense, his fists clenching and unclenching. Ezra was pale, fumbling with his phone like he was trying to find some way to undo what had already happened. And my mom, who had always been the most composed of the three, looked like a child caught sneaking cookies from the jar. "You think you're better than us," she whispered, almost accusingly, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. The very same words they had typed in their chat just a week ago. Only now, they were seeing the truth of them reflected back. "I don't think I'm better," I said softly, taking another slow step toward them. "I just worked harder. I just built something real. And for the first time, you're seeing that hard work has consequences. Consequences you didn't anticipate because you were too busy assuming I'd always be at your disposal." Ezra finally spoke, his voice tight and high-pitched. "But we didn't mean." "Didn't mean what?" I asked, stopping a few feet from them, looking directly at each of their faces. "To treat me like I owed you my life? Didn't mean to expect me to cover all your mistakes? Didn't mean to laugh at me when I tried to get ahead? Because whether you meant it or not, that's exactly what you did. And now, you're seeing it play out." Marvin's face twisted in frustration and disbelief. He opened his mouth, probably to yell, but I raised my hand slightly, a simple gesture that froze him in place. "I know every single conversation you had about me. Every plan, every complaint, every sneer," I said. "I know exactly how much you thought you were owed. And now, for the first time, you're powerless. You can beg, plead, or threaten all you want. It won't change anything." They all sank slightly, like the floor beneath them had given way. My mom's hand shook slightly as she fumbled with her purse strap. Ezra's phone slipped from his fingers, and Marvin just stood there, muttering to himself, trying to figure out how he had miscalculated so badly. I let it sit for a moment. Just the silence, the weight of years of mistreatment, the panic radiating off of them. I wanted them to understand, really understand, that their sense of entitlement had finally met the reality of someone who refused to be manipulated. And then, I finally added, my voice calm but deliberate, "The question now is simple. How are we going to move forward? Because right now, you have nothing without me." They all looked at me, eyes wide, and I could see the panic shifting to desperation, like a tide that had finally reached its breaking point. My mom whispered, barely audible, "Logan, please." I smiled faintly, letting the words hang. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for them. Almost, but not really. This was the moment I had waited for my entire life. The moment they realized that their manipulation, their entitlement, and their greed could no longer touch me. And then I noticed it, a small tremor in Ezra's hands, the way Marvin's jaw clenched tighter than it had ever done before, the way my mom's eyes darted as if she were trying to find a lifeline that didn't exist. They were still standing there when I reached the bottom of the lobby steps. The lamplight caught the worry in my mom's face and the raw, embarrassed fury in Marvin's. Ezra looked small, like a kid trying to act tough in front of a playground bully. None of them met my eyes for more than a second. Good. Let them look away. Let them feel it. Before we talk about moving forward, I said, slow and quiet. I want you to understand exactly what you've lost and why. Marvin barked. You can't just, but I cut him off with a single look. He shut up. That's the thing about people who live off other people's fear. They have very little tolerance when the tables turn. I told them, in plain language, what had happened, that the payments I'd been covering had been systematically undone, that the cards they'd been running up for years were no longer functional in the way they expected, and that the transfer windows they relied upon were closed unless I authorized them. I did not give them a how-to. I didn't need to. I watched each truth settle on their faces like winter frost, thin, then heavier, then impossible to ignore. You froze our transfers? My mom whispered. It was not phrased as a question. It was accusation, disbelief, plea, all arranged in a single breath. I put controls in place, I said. I made sure the money you thought you had would not disappear into the same habits that put you in this mess. My voice was even, controlled, the way theirs had never been when they asked for help. Ezra tried to reason. But come on, Logan, you always helped. You always. The sentence fell apart on him. You could see the memory of every lunch he skipped while I covered their bills, every laugh at some idea of mine that later ended up as someone else's project. He was grasping at an image that no longer fit reality. This was the part I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. The way they'd try to gaslight, to rewrite things, to turn sympathies into liabilities. Let them rewrite. It won't change the ledger. They'd spent decades building a story where they were victims, and I was the obliging benefactor. Now the ledger had a truth the story could not absorb. When Marvin finally spoke, it wasn't the roaring proclamation I'd expected. His voice was small, pinched. Why would you do this to us? The question would have been laughable in any other context. Not here. Here, it was a confession. They believed I belonged to them. I let the silence do the work. You told everyone I owed you everything, I said. So I gave you what you asked for, again and again, until I realized you weren't asking. You were expecting. You weren't asking because you trusted me. You were asking because you were certain I would always be the safety net. I decided I wouldn't be that anymore. My mom's face shifted through expressions so fast I thought it might tear. Fear, anger, bargaining. Logan, we can fix this. We'll cut costs. We'll get jobs. I'll sell the watch. That's not the point, I said. Selling things won't fix the underlying expectation. You think apologies erase years of leering entitlement. They don't. You don't get to treat me like a piggy bank and then ask for mercy when the well dries up. Ezra dropped to the floor in a heap of limbs and wobbly bravado, eyes watering. Marvin grabbed his arm hard and hauled him up, embarrassed and furious and so very tired of being exposed. My mom kept whispering, please, 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 like an incantation. There's a particular sound greed makes when it begins to panic. It's a high little whine in the throat, a plea dressed as practicality. I heard it from my mom when she asked, can't you just give us one more chance? One more transfer? One. No, I said. I wanted that one syllable to be heavy enough to sink a ship. Because one more chance is exactly what you would use to get two more. That cycle is why you're here. That cycle is why these cards were maxed out and these debts kept growing. This isn't about punishment for the sake of cruelty. It's about boundaries. I could see the protest building in them, the old arguments ready to be shoved into motion. But family, but you're my son, but we raised you. All the worn phrases they'd thrown at me when they wanted favors. I'd listened to those phrases for 28 years. I'd been silent and dutiful until silence became consent. No more. What are you going to do? Marvin started, and then stopped because words like disinherit, lawyer, and press charges hovered loose-headedly in his brain. They had never acted. They only imagined consequences. Now it was my turn to imagine. I'm going to make sure you cannot treat me or anyone else the same way again, I said. That starts with your finances. It continues with consequences for public lies and slander. It continues with a firm refusal to let anyone use pity as currency. Their faces crumpled differently at the mention of public lies. My mom's jaw tightened. Marvin's eyes flashed with the memory of years of boastful pronouncements at family gatherings about what I owed them. They had always been loud in public, a strategy. I had been quiet. That would change. Marvin lunged forward then, not physically, but in a way that tried to reclaim bargaining power. If you tell anyone, his threat was a bluff. Everyone knew it. He had always preferred the sound of a threat to the work of following through. If I tell anyone, I said, people will already know what they need to know about how you behaved for years. I don't want to expose you out of malice, but I will not let this continue. My voice had no malice. It was an inevitability, the kind that leaves a person rearranging their will. What I didn't tell them, because this wasn't the battlefield for technicalities, was how I'd prepared. I'd left breadcrumbs they couldn't see. I'd made sure there were audits and paper trails and a handful of neutral third parties who knew enough to make the truth undeniable if they tried to gaslight me publicly. I had legal counsel on standby, not because I wanted to unleash lawyers, but because I wanted the option to protect myself. That, more than anything, made them tremble. They had relied for years on my reluctance, and now I had none. They begged, they pleaded, they offered part-time jobs, promises of change, offers of humble restitution. I listened, and in every promise I heard calculus. How long would before things slid back to the old pattern? How much would they have to give up to keep the illusion of control? I could smell the math. I let them say their piece, then I told them what I wanted. Not money, not a quick fix, but a different set of terms. A public acknowledgement. A written agreement they could sign that would force them into accountability. No more surprise requests. No more asking for cash without explicit terms. A clause about transparency around financial decisions involving family members. I wanted clear, enforceable boundaries. Concrete consequences. I wanted them to understand that charity without responsibility was not charity at all. Marvin laughed then, a small, broken sound. You want paperwork, he scoffed. You want us to sign contracts with our son. Yes, I said. I want paperwork. I want structure. I want to make sure you can't erase years of attitude with a few hollow words. At that, my mom flinched like someone had slapped her face. You're being cruel, she whispered. Setting rules is not cruelty, I said. It's adulthood. Just when I thought the conversation could at least find a plausible midpoint, Ezra blurted out, all bright and pathetic. If you do this, we'll lose everything. The house, the car. He was listing their material anchors as if quoting the weather. You mean the things your spending habits have been propped up by? I said. Yes. There may be losses. There may be consequences. That's part of this. My mom fell to her knees suddenly, an image I will never forget. The woman who had stood at my graduation, holding a smug half-smile, now clinging to the marble floor begging like a supplicant. She said one thing that hit me harder than any insult. We gave you life. We raised you. How can you do this to us? That line, the final refuge of entitlement, almost worked. For a fraction of a second, I felt my chest twist, because in any other life, maybe it would have mattered. But the truth was this. Giving someone life is not a license to own it. You raised me, I said gently. You also taught me that I could do better than resentment. You should have taught yourselves that, too. They would scream later. They would weep. They would try to rewrite what had happened. They might call friends, fling accusations, arrange sob stories at dinner tables and in-laws' living rooms. They might threaten to call the police. They might even try to damage me in the public eye. Maybe they already had a plan to fight back. As I walked away from them that night, the lobby lights hummed. The elevators whirred. Marvin watched me go like a man watching a train leave the station, all hopes tied to one car that would never return. Ezra clutched his phone like a lifeline, and my mom wiped her cheeks as if that was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't gloat. I didn't slam a door. I left them with the exact thing they had always feared, accountability. And then, because they were human and not monoliths, they did the one thing that betrayed them again. They started planning not to change, but to fight. When I got upstairs, the first thing in my inbox was a voicemail from Marvin. The message was short and brittle, threats, demands, the usual. I saved it. Then I sat down and wrote a single, curt email to one person I trusted, an old friend who handled accounting for a living, and sent a single line. If they try anything, call me. Don't let them off the hook this time. Outside, A car alarm began to wail. In a few minutes, I knew, the family group chat would be exploding. They'd be blaming one another. They'd be looking for scapegoats. They'd be trying to stitch back the reality they'd ripped apart with years of entitlement. And yet, even as I felt the last tremors of adrenaline leave me, part of me braced. This was only the beginning. They were smart in the ways families are, skilled at manipulation, at playing the long, small game where guilt is slowly weaponized. If I wanted change that would last, I had to be smarter. I poured a glass of water, sat at my kitchen table, and opened a fresh document. I started to list, methodically, what would come next. Notifications to creditors, a line about public acknowledgement, an explicit calendar of repayments and responsibilities. It was boring in one sense, legalese and logistics. But in another sense, it was the calmest, most grounding thing I'd done, converting years of resentment into systems. And then my phone lit up with a photo of a bank statement sent from an unknown number. The balance, a number with commas and zeros, had a line item marked, pending reversal. Below it, a message, "We need to talk." Now, the sender ID read, MOM. I took a breath. I read the message twice. I typed a reply and paused, my fingers poised. I hit send. Okay, we'll talk, but on my terms. The typing dots appeared, then disappeared. Then, from downstairs, I heard a car pull away, tires crunching gravel. Someone was leaving in anger or shame. I couldn't tell which. My phone vibrated again. It was Marvin, calling. The screen flashed his name with the little smug emoji he always used when he wanted to sound casual. I let it ring. I didn't pick up. There was more to be done. There would be fallout. There would be lawyers, bluster, and the kind of family drama that peels paint off the past. I was ready, but I also wanted to savor it. Every uncomfortable hour, every desperate text, every small, crumpled apology when they had to sit across from me at a table and face that they were not owed me. Then my doorbell rang. I looked at the screen. Marvin's face filled it, pale and furious. He wasn't alone. Behind him was someone I hadn't expected, the cousin I thought was loyal to their side, standing with an expression that could only be described as grim. I opened the door. They both stopped mid-breath when they saw me. Marvin started to speak. The cousin, whose name I hadn't heard in years, raised a hand, steady and businesslike. "Logan," he said, "we need to talk. It's about the bank." Before he finished, my phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown attorney's email. Subject line, "Urgent demand for restitution." The words blurred and then sharpened. "We're preparing to take actions that will make this public." I looked at the two men in my doorway and then down at my phone. The night, which had felt like mine a moment ago, just widened into something larger. "You invited this," Marvin sputtered. "No," I said. "I called it." He laughed, a thin, brittle sound. "You'll regret this." I held up my phone, opened the document I'd been drafting, and tapped to send. The email went to a handful of people, one accounting friend, two lawyers, and an independent mediator whose name I'd kept in my back pocket for years. Then I closed the door slowly. They were not the only villains in this story, but they were the ones who had made the choice. And now, with their lives and reputations beginning to fray, I sat back down at my table and waited for the next move. The clock on my oven clicked. The building hummed. My phone vibrated again. 3 calls at once, then a text. "Mom, please don't make us do this publicly." "Marvin, call me." "Unknown attorney. We have instructions." I stared at the messages. Something in me clenched and released. This was revenge, yes, but it was also a reckoning. I'd wanted them to hurt first so they might learn. Now the hurt was spreading faster than I anticipated, and I wondered, in that quiet second, if I had the stomach for watching them burn. And yet, the doorbell rang one more time. Outside was someone I had not expected and had not planned for. A neighbor, face tight, clutching an envelope addressed to me. Inside, a single folded page, a bank's notice, a legal-looking header, and a line that made the room go cold. Pending freeze. Account under review due to suspicious activity. My phone lit up one last time that night. A single voicemail from an unknown number. "You're playing with fire, Mr. Collins. We can make sure it keeps burning." I pressed play and listened. The voice was official. calm, detached. I turned the volume down, swallowed, and realized I would have to choose, escalate, or step back. Either way, there was no going back to the quiet life they'd expected of me. My coffee had gone cold at the edge of the mug. I picked it up, sipped, and waited for them to knock again. I set the mug down and walked to the window. The street was quiet, but I could feel the tension radiating from the lobby below. They hadn't left yet. They were still hovering, unsure whether to knock again, call the police, or try some other desperate tactic. I knew their type. They always overthink, always panic, always try to manipulate their way out until the rules finally trap them. I opened the door again, this time stepping out fully. Marvin, my mom, and Ezra were all there, a mix of fury and desperation painted across their faces. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I simply raised my hand and gestured for them to listen. They froze immediately. "I've given you time to understand your position," I said, slow and deliberate. "Now it's over. You've gambled on my silence and my willingness to fix your mistakes. That's done." Marvin opened his mouth, probably to yell, but I continued. "The transfers are gone. The credit cards are frozen, and any future transactions you might have relied on are under my control. You tried to manipulate me for years, and now you're seeing the cost of those manipulations." My mom's face twisted in outrage. "This is cruel, Logan. We're your family." "No," I said, voice calm but firm. "Family doesn't demand obedience under threat of shame and then act shocked when the obedience ends. You made your choices. You wanted me to serve as your safety net. That's over." Ezra stepped forward, his hands shaking. "But you can't. People won't." "I can," I said, "and they won't need to. You've already done the damage. Every call, every text, every complaint you've made in private about what I owe you is documented. Every attempt to manipulate, to coerce, to guilt me has been recorded. You've created the perfect paper trail against yourselves." Marvin's face went pale. My mom's hands trembled, clutching at her purse as though it were armor. Ezra's bravado crumbled completely, revealing the little boy they'd spent years grooming to follow their commands. I let the silence stretch. I wanted them to feel it, to understand it fully. The power they'd held over me for decades was gone, replaced by a truth they couldn't spin or charm their way out of. "Starting now," I said, "you will have no access to anything without my direct approval. No transfers, no loans, no bailouts. Any attempt to bypass this will be documented and can be taken to legal authorities. You will also make a public acknowledgement of your expectations and manipulations over the years. Written, signed. Not a casual apology, formal, accountable, and enforceable." My mom opened her mouth, but no words came. She looked like someone realizing they had been caught in a lie too deep to escape. Marvin muttered something incoherent, and Ezra just stared at the ground, defeated. "You'll get nothing else," I continued. "No money, no favors, no special treatment. You gambled on me being loyal to a family story that never existed. That story is over." They were silent now. The panic had shifted to resignation. They understood, finally, that I wasn't bluffing, that the power dynamics had shifted permanently. I could see the realization in Marvin's shoulders slumping, in my mom's eyes welling, and in Ezra's nervous glances around the lobby. "Do you understand?" I asked, slow and deliberate. They nodded, barely. Words failed them. It wasn't just anger or frustration. It was the weight of knowing that every manipulation, every demand, every entitlement had been undone, and there was nothing they could do to reverse it. I turned back toward my apartment. "Good. Now leave. All of you. You're done here," Marvin muttered. This isn't over, but it had no bite. I didn't look back. I closed the door and locked it, the sound of the click final, decisive. From the window, I watched them file back to their car, arguing quietly among themselves. My mom was already blaming Marvin. Ezra was cowering in the back seat. They had no idea how far-reaching the consequences would be, how public the acknowledgement would eventually become, or how many people would now know what kind of family they really were. The weeks that followed were quiet but tense. They tried phone calls, texts, emails, even showing up at my building again, but every attempt was met with the same calm, measured boundaries. Their accounts remained frozen or carefully monitored. Their public lies about me were countered with evidence I'd carefully documented over the years. Every effort to regain power ended in frustration, humiliation, or both. In the end, the family who had spent decades belittling, manipulating, and exploiting me was left powerless. They had no access to funds, no control over narratives, and no way to demand anything from me again. Marvin and my mom were still proud, still entitled in their attitudes, but now it was impotent. Their words were empty, their threats meaningless. Ezra learned quickly that I was no longer a person to be intimidated or toyed with. I didn't forgive them. There was no reconciliation. There was only justice, slow, deliberate, and effective. They were left to confront themselves, their greed, and the consequences of a lifetime of entitlement. And me? I finally had peace. I could move forward, knowing I had reclaimed my life, my finances, and my dignity. The family that had once been villains in my life had proven it once again, and now, for the first time, I held all the cards. It was over. I was free, and they would never forget it. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Hi everyone, my name's Cody, and I never thought I'd be writing a story about my own family like this. But here we are. I just graduated from university, and honestly, I should have been celebrating one of the happiest days of my life. Instead, I ended up in the middle of one of the most ridiculous and infuriating family spectacles I've ever witnessed. Let me start from the beginning. My family has always had issues. My mom, Veronica, is the kind of person who measures everyone's worth based on what they achieve, or, more accurately, what she thinks they achieve. My younger sister, Livia, has always been the golden one in her eyes. Everything Livia does is celebrated, applauded, or exaggerated, while I've spent most of my life existing in the background, doing what's expected without ever getting much recognition. So, graduation day rolls around. I had a small get-together at our house, mostly family and a few close friends. I was proud of myself, honestly. I'd worked 2 jobs while finishing school, kept my grades up, and managed to save enough to move out eventually. I wanted this night to be about my accomplishment, not anyone else's, but I should have known better. As soon as people arrived, Mom was already in her element. She had this bright smile, clapping her hands and announcing to anyone within earshot how proud she was of Livia for buying her very first apartment. I tried to brush it off, assuming it would be a brief mention. I mean, sure, Livia had been moving toward independence, but it wasn't exactly newsworthy in my eyes. Then she grabbed the mic. I kid you not, she brought an actual microphone to our living room and started giving this speech about how amazing Livia was, how she was so responsible, so ambitious, and how she inspired all of us. People were nodding, clapping along. I tried to smile, but inside, I felt this odd mix of amusement and irritation. Halfway through her speech, she started saying things like, "And it's just so wonderful to see your siblings following in her footsteps and contributing to the family in meaningful ways." My chest tightened because I knew exactly where this was going. She was subtly comparing me to Livia, implying I hadn't accomplished as much. When the applause for Livia's apartment achievement reached its peak, I realized I couldn't just sit there silently. I waited until Mom paused, took a sip of her drink, and looked around expectantly. Then, with the calmest tone I could muster, I said, "That's funny. She's been paying rent to me for months." The room froze. The laughter stopped. The clapping died midair. Even my friends at the edge of the room looked like they'd just stepped into a movie scene. Mom's smile faltered, but she tried to recover immediately, saying something like, "Cody, that's not." And then she stopped herself. I could see the panic in her eyes, the wheels turning as she tried to figure out how to spin this in front of all our relatives. Livia's face turned red, not even from embarrassment, more like outrage. "What are you talking about?" she hissed, her voice shaking slightly. I just shrugged and said, "The apartment? Yeah, the one you moved into this spring. You've been paying me $1,200 a month." The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone was looking at my mom now. and I could practically hear the silent judgment in their expressions. For once, I felt this weird surge of satisfaction, like I had flipped the script that had been in place for years. Mom opened her mouth, closed it, and then repeated something about family support that sounded hollow even to her. Livia started muttering something about me, making things up, and how dare I. But no one was really listening at that point. They were all trying to process the fact that the supposedly perfect, independent sister they'd been applauding was, in fact, renting from me. And just when I thought the room couldn't get any more uncomfortable, my uncle, who has always had a taste for drama, leaned in with a smirk and said, "Well, Cody, I guess congratulations are in order then. Looks like someone's been holding all the cards." At that moment, I realized just how quiet the room had become. It wasn't that people didn't know how to react. It was more like they couldn't. My mom, Veronica, who normally had a way of turning any situation into a performance, seemed completely thrown. For years, she had carefully curated the image of Livia as the golden child, the responsible one, the successful daughter. And now, in front of all the relatives and friends she had invited, that image was unraveling right in front of her eyes. Mom opened her mouth several times, trying to find words, but all that came out was a stammer. "See, Cody, I don't think." I raised a hand politely, cutting her off. "It's fine, Mom. I just thought it was worth pointing out. People might want the full story." Livia's face went from red to an almost unnatural shade of purple. "Cody, that's not true," she snapped. I pay what I owe, but you're making it sound like I'm taking advantage of you." "You've been paying me rent for months, Livia," I said calmly. "I have the bank statements. I have the receipts. It's not up for debate." At this point, my cousin Nathan, who is usually quiet and lets Mom do all the drama, leaned forward, clearly interested in how the situation would play out. "Wait, so the apartment she's been bragging about, she doesn't even own it?" he asked, smirking. "She's been renting from Cody?" A few other family members exchanged glances, murmuring under their breath. I could feel the atmosphere in the room shift from cheerful to tense very quickly. Mom tried to regain control, her voice tight, but forcing the usual warmth. "Everyone, let's remember this is a celebration." "Cody, I think you're exaggerating." I interrupted her again, this time letting a small smile creep onto my face. "I'm really not, Mom. In fact, if anyone wants to see the lease agreement, I have it right here." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, showing a clearly scanned copy of the lease. The room went even quieter. You could practically hear people swallowing. Even my friends, who had been mostly observing, looked like they were holding back laughter. Livia's hands shook as she snatched at the phone, trying to block me. "Cody, put that away. You can't just." "Why not?" I said calmly. "I thought tonight was supposed to be about honesty, about celebrating accomplishments. Seems like there's some truth everyone should know." Mom's face had gone pale, and I noticed a bead of sweat forming at her temple. For a woman who had always thrived in social settings, who had spent decades learning how to charm people into believing her narrative, this was a rare and beautiful crack in her armor. She tried a different tactic. "Cody, maybe we should not bring this up in front of everyone. Let's keep the focus on your graduation, okay?" I shook my head slowly. "Actually, Mom, I think this is the perfect time. After all, I've been working hard while you've been telling everyone else that my sister is the one achieving things. I think it's time everyone got the full picture." You could see Mom trying to think quickly. She opened her mouth and then closed it again. She was searching for something, anything, to regain control, but the room was already shifting against her. The relatives who had always been polite, who had nodded along at every family dinner, now had skeptical looks on their faces. That's when Aunt Marlene, who has a reputation for being dramatic, chimed in. "Wait, so you've been paying Cody rent the whole time?" she said to Livia, shaking her head as if this was a betrayal of some cosmic law. "And you didn't even tell anyone? How is that possible?" Livia's voice was trembling, her usual confidence gone. I didn't think it was a big deal. Cody offered, and I said yes. He's my brother. I didn't realize it would be an issue." "It's a huge issue," I said firmly. "Because for months, Mom has been standing in front of people, saying that you bought this apartment on your own, taking credit for something that isn't true. And the more I think about it, the more it seems like everyone here has been complicit in pretending everything is perfect for the sake of appearances. I could see Mom starting to lose it now, the kind of loss that wasn't loud or violent, but quiet and terrifying in its intensity. She began pacing slightly, muttering under her breath, trying to piece together a way to spin this in her favor. Cody, you're being unfair. You know we only wanted to celebrate Livia. Why do you have to turn this into some sort of spectacle? I raised my eyebrows. Spectacle? Mom, you're the one who brought the microphone and made it about Livia in the first place. I'm just answering the narrative you set up. At that moment, I realized just how much everyone was watching. The atmosphere was electric. Relatives who had been quietly sipping drinks were now whispering, sharing glances, and some even leaning in as if waiting for the next move. My sister was turning increasingly desperate, my mom increasingly frantic. And then it happened. My cousin Nathan, the one who always seems to enjoy drama, leaned over and whispered loud enough for a few people nearby to hear. I can't wait to see how Mom tries to get out of this without making herself look completely ridiculous. That was when I noticed a subtle but deliberate shift in Mom. She straightened her back, tried to smooth her hair, and spoke in that perfectly controlled, cheerful tone she reserves for social victories. Well, everyone, let's not let minor details overshadow this wonderful day. Cody has worked so hard, and today is really about celebrating him. Her attempt to redirect attention back to me felt weak, though. I could see through it, and the people in the room could too. Whispers spread. Questions were asked under the guise of casual curiosity. So, wait, Cody, you own the apartment? You've been renting it out to Livia? I nodded, calmly sipping my drink. Exactly. And yes, she's been a perfect tenant, always paying on time. But I figured it was time everyone knew the truth. Livia tried one last time to regain control. Cody, you don't understand. This makes me look terrible in front of everyone. I leaned back, folding my arms. Well, you should have thought about that before letting Mom make a public announcement claiming you bought an apartment that isn't yours. The room was tense. You could feel the weight of it, like the air itself had thickened. Relatives were whispering, glancing at each other. Friends were watching with wide eyes, trying to figure out how this family dinner had turned into a courtroom drama. My mom's face had gone almost white now, the kind of pale that only comes from realizing that years of control and manipulation might be slipping through your fingers. I knew in that moment that the night wasn't just about my graduation anymore. It was about unraveling the carefully constructed image of my family, exposing the hypocrisy and favoritism that had been so casually accepted for years. And then my mom did something I didn't expect. She leaned forward, putting both hands on the table, her voice low but sharp. Cody, you think this is funny, don't you? You think showing everyone this evidence, makes you the hero in this story. I looked at her evenly, holding my ground. No, Mom. I just think it's time the truth came out. Her eyes narrowed, and I could feel the tension spike even higher. At that moment, I realized this wasn't just about Livia or even me. This was about Mom, and how far she would go to protect her image, even if it meant turning the whole room against her own family to maintain the illusion. The next words that came out of her mouth made me realize the night was about to get completely out of control. Everyone, listen to me. I think it's time we all had a little family meeting, she said, her tone calm but threatening underneath. Mom's words hung in the air like a warning. A family meeting sounded harmless enough on the surface, but given Mom's personality, I knew it was going to be a carefully staged attempt to regain control. I didn't move. I just watched her, quietly, as she glanced around the room, her eyes flicking from one relative to another. She cleared her throat, trying to force authority back into her voice. Everyone, let's gather in the living room. I think we need to have an honest conversation about what's really going on here. My sister Livia shot me a look that mixed panic and desperation, her hands twisting nervously. She muttered under her breath, "Please don't make this worse." I stayed seated, calmly sipping my drink, because I had a feeling making it worse was exactly what needed to happen. One by one, everyone shuffled into the living room. There was a subtle tension in the air that you could almost touch. A few of our relatives had started whispering among themselves, eyes darting between Mom, Livia, and me. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Mom sat at the head of the sofa, putting on the same composed expression she always used when she wanted to appear in control. Livia stood near the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. She looked like a deer caught in headlights. "Cody," Mom said, turning toward me with a forced smile, "would you care to explain why you felt it necessary to expose Livia like that in front of everyone?" I leaned back, relaxed, letting my words carry the weight of truth. "Expose? Mom, you were the one making a public announcement about her apartment. I just corrected the narrative. People were being misled, and I thought they should know the reality." Mom's expression hardened. "Cody, you know that's not fair. We were celebrating a milestone, and you decided to turn it into an attack on your sister. That's not how we handle family." I shook my head slowly. "No one attacked anyone. I stated facts. Livia has been renting from me, not owning an apartment. That's all. It's only an attack if you've been presenting a lie as the truth." There was a murmur from the back of the room. Uncle Leonard, who usually tries to stay neutral but enjoys stirring trouble when things get tense, leaned forward. "Wait a second. So you're telling us Livia hasn't bought her apartment, and Mom has been telling everyone she did?" "Yes," I said simply. "That's exactly what I'm saying. And I have the documents to prove it." My mom's eyes flickered with panic. She tried to recover, her tone slipping into that practiced warmth that usually convinced everyone she was reasonable. "Cody, you have to understand, it's not just about the apartment. It's about appearances, about family pride. Livia's accomplishments are real. She's managing her finances responsibly, in this apartment." I held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Mom, managing finances responsibly doesn't include pretending you've bought something when you haven't. That's not responsible, that's deceptive." Livia's face went pale, and she sank onto the arm of the sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Cody, please. You're making me look awful. Everyone's going to think I'm lying, cheating, or—" I looked around the room. "People are going to think exactly what I just said, which is, you've been paying rent for months and taking credit for it publicly. That's the truth. Nothing more, nothing less." Mom stood suddenly, walking toward me with a forced calm that felt more threatening than peaceful. "Cody, I think you're forgetting what family is supposed to be about. Family protects each other, supports each other. Instead, you're undermining your sister in front of everyone. This is unkind and ungrateful." I kept my voice calm, but my hands clenched slightly. Protecting each other doesn't mean lying. Supporting someone doesn't mean taking credit for something that isn't theirs. And ungrateful? Mom, I've worked 2 jobs while finishing school and handled my own life responsibly. I've never needed public praise. But I also don't have to sit by while you rewrite reality to make someone else look perfect." Aunt Marlene gasped audibly, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide as she glanced at Mom. "Veronica, I don't know what to say," she stammered. Mom's composure began to crack. Her hands shook slightly as she ran them through her hair. "This is ridiculous," she said, though the tightness in her voice betrayed her. "I've spent my entire life trying to raise children who are responsible, who contribute to the family. And this is the thanks I get? You're turning everyone against me at my own daughter's celebration?" I shook my head slowly. "Mom, I'm not turning anyone against you. I'm just showing them the truth. If anyone is reacting strongly, it's because they're realizing you've been controlling the narrative for years." Livia peeked up from behind her hands. "Cody, maybe you should stop. Please. I can fix this." "I can. You can't fix what you haven't owned," I said softly. "This isn't something you can spin or make pretty with words." At that moment, my cousin Nathan, who had been quietly observing from the back, leaned against the wall, his expression amused but calculating. "Mom," he said, his voice calm, "this is going to get worse if you keep trying to spin it. People are noticing, and honestly, it's kind of fascinating watching it all unravel." Mom's eyes narrowed at him. "Nathan, this is not the time to be playful about serious family matters." Nathan just shrugged. "I'm not being playful. I'm being honest. And right now, The truth is coming out whether you like it or not. That's when I realized exactly how far this confrontation was going to go. Mom's usual strategies, charming, redirecting, using pity or flattery, were failing. Every attempt to manipulate the narrative was being met with evidence, calm reasoning, and family members who were now questioning everything they thought they knew. Mom's breathing quickened, and I could see her struggling to keep control. Then, without warning, she slammed her hand on the table, startling everyone in the room. "Enough!" she shouted, her voice sharp. "Cody, I'm not letting you ruin this night. This is my family, and I will handle it my way." Everyone froze. Livia flinched. I stayed calm, realizing that whatever came next would define the rest of the evening. And then Mom did something that made my stomach twist with anticipation. She pulled out her phone and began furiously typing, glancing around to make sure no one could see the screen. "What are you doing?" I asked. Mom didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed, her lips pressed together. The tension in the room reached a new level, the kind of suffocating silence where everyone is waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was clear she was about to make a move that could either save her image or destroy her credibility entirely. And at that moment, I realized that the night I thought would be about celebrating me had turned into a battle I had only just begun. I watched Mom's fingers fly across her phone screen, a mixture of fear and calculation in her eyes. She wasn't just panicking, she was plotting. I could see it in the way she kept glancing up at me, measuring my reaction while pretending to focus on the device. My sister Livia was still sitting on the sofa, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the carpet, clearly realizing that this was spiraling far beyond anything she had imagined. I leaned back and let the silence stretch. Let her stew. Let her feel that moment where control was slipping through her fingers. She had spent my entire life orchestrating narratives to make Livia look perfect, and now, with every second that ticked by, the veneer was cracking. Finally, she spoke, her voice deceptively calm. "Cody, I think it's time we clarified things for everyone. I'm going to send a message to the family group chat. That way, everyone knows my perspective." I raised an eyebrow. "Your perspective?" "Mom, the truth is already out. Everyone saw the lease. Everyone knows the apartment isn't yours. What could you possibly say that would change that?" She didn't answer me. Instead, she typed rapidly and then pressed send. Within seconds, a flurry of notifications began pinging across the room. Mom had sent a message to every relative and family friend in the group chat, except she hadn't framed it as clarification. She had framed it as a public accusation. The first message popped up on a cousin's phone. "I can't believe Cody is making false claims about Livia. He is trying to humiliate her in front of everyone. Please don't believe him. He's exaggerating and twisting things." I couldn't help the small smile that spread across my face. Mom had just stepped into the trap I had been setting. By trying to control the narrative publicly, she had given me the perfect opportunity to expose the full truth, and now it was all in motion. I picked up the phone closest to me, a table-side device that my aunt had set down, and typed a simple, factual reply. "For anyone who doubts me, here is the lease. Livia has been renting from me since March, paying $1,200 a month. This is the truth. Not an opinion, not an exaggeration. Evidence attached." A collective murmur swept through the room as relatives began opening their phones. Eyes widened. Whispers filled the space. Mom's face went pale, her hands trembling slightly. The panic was now unmistakable. She opened her phone, desperately trying to counter my message, but her fingers faltered. Every attempt she made to craft a narrative only reinforced the truth I had just laid out. Livia looked like she was about to sink through the floor. "Mom, Cody, please, stop," she begged, her voice cracking. I finally spoke, calmly, as if I were explaining a math problem rather than orchestrating one of the sweetest moments of quiet revenge in my life. "Mom, I'm not stopping. You set this up. You made the claims. You brought everyone here to celebrate something that isn't true. I'm simply showing the evidence. That's all." The room went quiet again, everyone now staring at Mom. Even my Uncle Leonard, who usually avoided taking sides, had a look of disbelief on his face. "Veronica, are you seriously standing by this?" he asked. Because it looks like Cody's right. Mom's lips pressed together. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands gripped her phone like it was a lifeline. Finally, she tried the classic diversion tactic. Everyone, let's focus on Cody's graduation. This is about him, not family disputes. I leaned forward, letting the moment stretch. You want to focus on my graduation? Perfect. Let's celebrate that. But let's not pretend Livia bought an apartment she hasn't. That's the distraction, Mom. That's the thing you've been clinging to for years to make her look perfect. Aunt Marlene, who had been quietly observing, now spoke, her voice sharp. Veronica, Cody's right. The lease shows exactly what he's saying. I don't know why you try to hide it, but it's out now. You can't take it back. Mom's face flushed red, and for the first time in years, I saw the frustration I had always suspected was hiding under her polished surface. This is unbelievable. You're all turning against me, defending him. I finally stood up, slowly, letting everyone see my posture. Calm, composed, and unafraid. Mom, I'm not turning anyone against you. I'm giving them the truth. You've spent my entire life spinning stories, making one child look perfect, ignoring reality. Tonight, the truth is finally visible. That's all. Livia finally spoke, her voice small and tentative. Cody, what are you doing to Mom? I met her eyes, steady and unwavering. I'm showing her what happens when you manipulate the truth for years. Everyone's seeing it now, Livia. You don't have to worry about me. This is between her and everyone else. The tension in the room was unbearable. My relatives were leaning forward in their chairs, mouths slightly open, phones in hand, silently absorbing every detail. Mom's jaw was tight, and I could see the wheels turning in her head, frantic and searching for a way to regain control. Then she did something that I hadn't expected, but that I had anticipated just enough to turn to my advantage. She reached into her bag, pulled out a small stack of envelopes, and slammed them onto the coffee table. Fine. If this is how it's going to be, we'll handle this properly. Everyone looked at her, confused. The envelopes were thick, professional-looking, and stamped with some official-looking emblem. My heart skipped a beat. She wasn't just panicking, she was escalating. This was no longer about bragging or a little manipulation. Mom was going nuclear. What is that? I asked calmly, crouching slightly to get a better look. Mom's eyes blazed. These are letters. Agreements, legal documents. Cody, you think you can embarrass the family and walk away? Not so fast. If you don't follow my instructions, these go straight to everyone you know. They prove things. They settle matters. And believe me, they're very unfavorable to you if you try to fight. A few relatives gasped. Livia's hands flew to her mouth. Even Aunt Marlene leaned forward, eyebrows raised. Veronica, what do you mean? I could feel the pieces falling into place. Mom was trying to bluff, trying to use intimidation to regain her control. But she had underestimated me. I had already done my homework, documented everything, and had all the evidence neatly organized. Her bluff was obvious to me, and I knew that once I acted, it would crumble spectacularly. I reached slowly for one of the envelopes, letting the room watch my movements. Mom, before we even open these, maybe it's time we all remembered one thing. Truth doesn't need threats. Facts don't need intimidation. And your attempts to scare people into believing a lie, they've already failed. Mom's face twisted with anger and panic. Cody, this is exactly what I meant to avoid. You're making it personal. You're humiliating me. I leaned in slightly, letting my words cut through the tension like a knife. I'm not humiliating you. I'm letting everyone see the consequences of your actions. The rest is on you. The room went silent again, heavier than before. Even my friends, who had been quietly observing from the corner, exchanged looks of disbelief. My relatives were frozen, caught in the crossfire between years of carefully maintained illusion and the reality I had just revealed. Then Mom did something I hadn't expected. She lifted one of the envelopes, shook it slightly, and said in a cold, measured voice, Fine. If you want the truth, Cody, you'll see it soon enough. But know this, what comes next will not be kind. I set the envelope down slowly, like it was something fragile. The room was still. You could hear the old clock in the hallway ticking like a judge. Mom's eyes were hard. The kind of hard that says she's ready to do whatever it takes to salvage a version of herself that only exists in her head. Livia looked hollow, as if she'd been sucking the light out of herself for weeks and finally realized there wasn't any left. "Open one," she said, voice barely there. "Let's see what you think you can use against me." Mom snapped her head toward Livia, anger flaring so fast it made her look younger and meaner than she ever had. "Don't you dare," she hissed. "Those are private. You wouldn't understand." I laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Private? You mean threats? Mom, why don't you just hand one to me, and we'll see how private they really are?" She hesitated. The mask slipped for a second, and I saw panic. Then, with the dramatic flourish she loved, she pushed the whole stack across the table toward me. "Fine. Read them," she said. "If you want to drag our family through the mud, then fine. Read them." I slid my finger under the flap of the top envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a typed letter, professional-looking, complete with letterhead. It read like something a lawyer would send if a client wanted a warning sent. Accusations, insinuations, vague threats about relationships ruined and reputations damaged if certain actions continued. It implied I had been irresponsible with family money in the past, hinted at debts, and suggested there were documents that could be shared with employers and friends. It was meant to intimidate. The kind of weaponized gossip a person with influence uses when they can't win on facts. I kept my face neutral as I read it out loud, because I wanted everyone to hear the tone of it, not only the words. "This letter contains allegations that, if published, could harm personal and professional relationships," I read. People in the room shifted uncomfortably. "It's mostly insinuation," I added. "There are no specifics. That's how these things work." Mom's mouth twitched. "You'll see," she said. "You'll all see." Then I did something I had been planning for weeks. I pulled my phone out and opened the folder I'd made in case tonight devolved into the exact kind of theater Mom was staging. It was a tidy, chronological set of documents. The lease, copies of each rent payment deposited into my account, the screenshots of texts where Mom coached Livia on what to say if asked about the apartment, and a recording, made with Livia's permission a few nights before, of Mom rehearsing the graduation speech line by line with the words, "Bought her first apartment," emphasized like it was a ritual. I didn't expect the silence to feel heavier when I showed people things they'd been told their whole lives were true. But it was. Faces changed from confusion to betrayal. Some people looked hurt. Others looked scandalized. Mom's cheeks flushed in a way that had nothing to do with color and everything to do with exposure. "Those payments went into my account," I said, watching the way the words landed. "I accepted them because Livia asked for help when she was short. I helped her because she's my sister. I put the rent into a savings account because I was saving to move out. I never claimed she owned it. Mom chose to say otherwise because it made for a better story." Uncle Leonard, who'd been staring with the blank expression he uses when he's trying not to take the wrong side, piped up. "So she was renting the whole time?" "Yes," I said. "She's been a tenant. Nothing more." Aunt Marlene folded her hands, eyes glistening. "Veronica, why would you?" Mom's voice came out thin and defensive. I wanted to celebrate her. It felt like a reward. I meant it to be inspiring. "On what basis?" my cousin Nathan asked sharply. "You had to invent it." The room shifted. People I'd only seen at weddings and funerals lingered by the doorway, their postures betraying the way they were choosing sides. Some glanced at Mom with pity, others with distaste. A few of them exchanged looks with me, real, human looks that didn't include the carefully cultivated admiration Mom had always cultivated. That was when I made the decision I'd been wrestling with, public or private. I wanted her exposed, but not humiliated beyond repair. I wanted consequences, but not cruelty. I wanted a clear line drawn where manipulation ended and accountability began. I stood, feeling the little ache behind my ribs that had been living there for years. "I'm not going to circulate anything to the whole town," I said. "I'm not here to ruin people for sport. But I can't keep pretending this is fine. Mom, you've been building a fantasy and asking everyone to live in it. That ends now." I took the recording and the documents and, with a calmness I didn't entirely feel, uploaded them to a simple folder and shared it privately with the family group chat. No commentary, just the files and the truth. Then I stood and looked at everyone in the room. I'm moving out next month, I said. I've worked for this degree, and I'm starting my life. I don't need to be the family's invisible bookkeeping department anymore. I've paid Livia's rent, but I'm done paying for appearances. Livia's face crumpled. I could see relief and shame and confusion all mixing together. Cody, she began, but I raised a hand. No apologies now, I said. You can apologize later if you mean it. Right now you need to decide who you are without the safety net of mom's stories. What happened in the days that followed was messy, but not chaotic. Some relatives called. A few did not. A small group, Aunt Marlene, Uncle Leonard, and a cousin who lives nearby, came by the next day with coffee and neutrality. They wanted to understand, not to side. A handful of others sent curt messages defending Mom, accusing me of grandstanding. Mom herself barricaded into a neutral zone of self-pity and righteous indignation, insisting I'd humiliated them all and that I was selfish and cruel. I expected fury, and there was some. I expected denial, and there was plenty. I didn't expect the quiet, practical fallout that followed. Invitations stopped coming, subtle social snubs started, and Mom found herself losing the little authority she'd held among acquaintances who'd previously elevated her for a good story. The neighbors who used to ask after her at block parties now asked pointed questions. The PDA moms who deferred to her suddenly kept conversations brief. I did not forgive her. Not then, not now. Forgiveness felt like an eraser, and she had a ledger of things to answer for. I cut financial ties. I stopped taking her calls about bills or favors. I stopped doing the emotional labor that had been expected of me since childhood. That didn't make me a monster. It made me a person asking for boundaries. Livia? She moved out of that apartment the following month. Not because I kicked her out, but because she finally admitted to herself that living in a fiction wasn't living. She rented a small place with a roommate and started paying me back, slowly and with apologetic notes. She never thanked me in a way that made it feel neat. She just showed up, paid what she owed, and apologized when the words came, not as absolution but as an admission. I accepted the payments. I didn't accept the idea that everything could go back to the way it was. Mom tried to rally support. She sent that stack of letters to a few people, but without specifics the letters read like threats and landed poorly. People are wary of those who use intimidation as a tool. A few relatives took her side publicly, and we've lost contact with them. That's fine. Holding on to relationships that require me to swallow truth isn't a relationship I want. As for me, after the dust settled, I had the quiet graduation party I deserved. A handful of real friends stayed, the ones who knew what I'd been carrying. We ate, we laughed, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing my life for someone else's applause. I signed the lease on a small apartment the following week, the one I'd been saving for, and moved my life into boxes that contained only what I'd earned and what I wanted. Now, months later, the situation is clear. Mom is isolated socially. She still tells versions of the story when people ask, but fewer people ask. Her influence has diminished because people saw the evidence and make their own judgments. Livia is rebuilding quietly. She is not forgiven by me for letting appearances matter more than honesty, but she's paying back what she owes and trying, in small ways, to learn to stand on her own. I'm not their moral arbiter. I'm just someone who won't be used as a prop. Some relatives distance themselves from us. A few remain loyal to Mom, which is on them. I don't waste energy on trying to change their minds. Me, I graduated, I moved out, and I stopped being invisible in my own life. I don't relish what I did. I don't enjoy exposing people, but I also won't let my life be edited by someone else's narrative. I'm still angry sometimes. I'm still hurt. I have not forgiven them, and I don't plan to pretend everything is fine. I have boundaries, a job, a small apartment, and friends who stayed. That's enough for now. The last time I saw Mom, she stood on her porch watching me carry the last box into my car. She called my name in that voice she once used to call me a child. I paused, without turning, and said, "Goodbye, Mom. Don't contact me unless you mean what you say." It felt brutal and final in a way that was necessary. I didn't perform forgiveness. I didn't offer reconciliation. I simply chose myself. If there's a moral to this mess, it's not revenge for revenge's sake. Revenge, in the end, was a tool that made the truth louder than the lies. It let me step out of the shadow of a story someone else had been writing for me. The family is fractured. Some pieces are gone. Some are painfully awkward. Some are trying to put themselves back together in a new shape. I don't pretend it's tidy. It isn't. But I have my name, my degree, and the quiet knowledge that I stopped being someone else's footnote. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you like this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.